fire outran horses. Whole towns disappeared in minutes. And deep in the Rockies, 40 men were trapped inside a mine because stepping outside meant instant death. This was the big burn of 1910, the firestorm that changed everything. August 20th, 1910. The fire stopped behaving like fire. By late afternoon, the northern Rockies were choked with smoke from 100 small burns. A nuisance, a normal summer. Then a dry front slammed into the mountains at 70 miles an hour, and every one of those tiny fires stood up at once. In minutes, separate fires merged into a single monster, an apocalyptic firestorm stretching from Idaho into Montana. It jumped rivers. It outran many trying to escape, even some on horseback. It turned entire towns into ash before most residents had time to flee. And somewhere out there, a ranger named Ed Pulaski was trying to keep his crew alive by forcing 40 men into an abandoned mine, because stepping outside meant certain death. This is the story of the Big Burn. The moment the mountains caught fire. The moment the U.S. Forest Service nearly died with its rangers. And the moment when America convinced itself, wrongly, that fire was something we could control forever. This disaster didn't begin with flames. It began months earlier. A long, hot drought dried the northern Rockies into tinder. Lightning storms rolled through, leaving hundreds of tiny little sparks behind. The young U.S. Forest Service, just 5 years old, had almost no manpower, no funding, and no equipment. In 1910, a ranger's gear list looked something like this: a canteen, a couple of personal items, a few hand tools, an axe, a shovel, maybe a mattock, and stubbornness. Political leaders insisted the wildfires were nothing to worry about. Railroads sparked new ones daily. Logging operations left the ground littered with dry branches, bark, and treetops, the perfect fuel. And there was no way for anyone to know that a dry weather front, the kind that brings sudden violent winds, was about to hit. No forecast, no warning, just instant chaos. Everything the Big Burn needed was already waiting. All it had to do was align. This is the classic inevitable negative outcome. A hazard left alone long enough eventually finds the perfect moment to break everything at once. 1910 didn't happen overnight. It was baked into the mountains for months. If you've never seen a crown fire blow over your head, it's hard to imagine what the men in 1910 faced. I've seen it once, early in my career when I was with the Air Force at McChord Air Force Base. I rolled out with a crew to a little wildfire just south of the runway. Dry conditions, strong wind out of the south, nothing dramatic, just a little smoke drifting up through the northwestern pine forest. We hit it with tank water and made good progress until one of the old hands stopped, looked up and said 2 words, which you never want to hear: crown fire. Though the fire at ground level was going out, the tops of the pines above us had ignited. No warning, no slow buildup, just poof. Fire exploding across the top of the canopy. We didn't pack up, we didn't coil hose, we just dropped everything, jumped in the truck, and drove, fast, down a narrow dirt track with a firestorm rolling through the treetops over our heads. The heat was intense. The sound wasn't just loud. It was like standing under jet engines. Thankfully, we got out clean. No injuries, no scorched paint, no lost gear. 20 minutes later, we came back to fetch what we dropped. Some of the hose was charred. That little stand of pines was now a field of black trunks and bare branches. The fast-moving fire had stripped everything else away. And that was just a tiny patch of forest. Now imagine that same violence across entire mountains, with no radios, no engines, no PPE, and no quick ride out. On August 20th, the windstorm hit like a freight train. Small fires crowned instantly. Flames vaulted from ridge to ridge, mile after mile. The fires spread 20 to 30 miles in a day in some places, and that's not a typo. Entire towns watched the sky go black at noon as the firestorm consumed oxygen and dropped soot like snow. Rangers tried to evacuate however they could, on horseback, by wagon, on foot. Railroad engineers drove through walls of flame to rescue families. For firefighters and many others, visibility dropped to nothing. Escape routes vanished. Fire behavior was beyond anything anyone had ever seen. And in the middle of all this was Ranger Ed Pulaski. Pulaski and his crew were trapped. The fire was moving faster than they could run. He knew the terrain. He knew there was an abandoned mine nearby. He drove his men toward it, roughly 40, give or take. In a blow-up like that, nobody's counting heads. He got everyone he could into the tunnel, and then he stood at the entrance and forced them to stay inside. Smoke poured in. The heat was brutal. Men panicked. Some tried to push past him, desperate to run. Pulaski drew his revolver. "If you come out," he said, "I'll shoot you." Not because he wanted to kill anyone, but because stepping outside meant certain death. Inside, men fainted, choked, and prayed. Pulaski stayed conscious as long as he could. When rescuers finally reached them, he was lying across the entrance, badly burned, barely alive. Most of his crew survived. A few did not. And nearly all of those men lived because Pulaski understood the fire better than they did and refused to let panic take the wheel. When the wind finally eased, the firestorm collapsed as quickly as it had risen. But the damage was biblical. 3 million acres burned, an area the size of Connecticut. More than 85 people died. Towns were erased. Rail lines and camps wiped out. Families lost everything, and some lost everyone. The young Forest Service was blamed for not stopping the fire, until the public realized no one could have stopped it. That realization saved the agency and changed American firefighting forever. "1910 taught us something, the hard way. A fire could move faster and hit harder than anyone expects. After the big burn, the nation swung toward one strategy: full suppression. Put every fire out, everywhere, immediately. It made sense at the time. But fire's natural, and forests that never burn don't stay safe. They just store fuel for the next big one. For decades, that fuel quietly piled up. And when other pressures stacked onto it, hotter, longer fire seasons, drier forests, homes built deeper into fire-prone terrain, and wind events that can knock down trees or power lines in an instant, put all that together, and you get modern megafires. Paradise, California in 2018, the Oregon Labor Day fires in 2020, the Marshall Fire in Colorado in 2021, and dozens of smaller blow-ups every year. The Big Burn didn't just shape our past, it shaped how we think fire should behave. But we often find ourselves unprepared for how quickly the elements of disaster can line up and surprise us again. Because the danger isn't in the flame. It's believing a complex problem has a simple solution. A hazard ignored long enough will find its moment. The men of 1910 fought as hard as anyone could have. But some fires you don't beat, you survive. Fire in remote terrain isn't something you eliminate. It's a force you have to respect and be ready for. So, here's an ounce. A disaster doesn't care what you expect. It does what conditions allow. And sometimes that's more than you planned for. And that's it. An ounce submitted for your consideration. If you value clear-eyed lessons from real disasters, hit the like button and subscribe. It tells the algorithm this kind of straight talk is worth showing to others. Thanks.